Hello everyone, and welcome to a video on the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel. I'm Spencer, this is Casey.
Hey, what's up?
And today we're doing a deck tech on Bant Company. How boring. Also, how fitting.
Yeah, it's definitely an important deck to know the ins and outs of. Like, it's a deck I'm sure everybody's played against, but not everybody necessarily knows everything the deck does.
When it comes to Bant Company, what is the reasons that people come to the conclusion that they should be playing Bant right now?
Well, it's sort of the 50-50 deck of the format where you have no really bad matchups. Like, you're not likely to be caught with your pants down against any deck. You have the tools to beat any deck.
Okay. Well, let's go over the main deck, and this is the list that's actually designed by Casey, that he almost played at the RPTQ. A little bit different take on the deck. Let's just go over it. We'll talk about Bant Company as a whole, and we'll also talk about this version of the deck, but we have 2 Archangel Avacyn, 2 Bounding Krasis, 3 Duskwatch Recruiter, 1 Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, 1 Nissa, Vastwood, Seer, 4 Reflector Mage, 4 Selfless Spirit, 4 Spell Queller, 4 Sylvan Advocate, 2 Tireless Tracker. Then we have 2 Clash of Wills, 4 Collected Company, 2 Dromoka's Command, 25 lands, with 4 Canopy Vistas, 4 Forest, 2 Fortified Village, 1 Island, 2 Lumbering Falls, 3 Plains, 2 Port Town, 3 Prairie Stream, 4 Coast. So, huge major difference is you don't have Evolving Wilds.
Yeah, I'm playing basically Prairie Streams I'm playing Canopy Vistas and Port Towns and changing my basic configuration a little bit. I think that this will let you play more untapped lands than the Evolving Wilds versions, because the Evolving Wilds version, like Evolving Wilds, doesn't help your Fortified Village come into play untapped. So you end up playing multiple tapped lands on your curve out a lot when you're playing Evolving Wilds. I think this, as long as you are smart about your land drops, you have to make your land drops in the right order, and that's very important with this mana base. But I think as long as you do that, you should never really stumble getting to 4.
What is the best creature in the deck?
So the best, like, pound-for-pound creature is definitely Archangel Avacyn, like, in terms of its power level. The best creature, the best, like, Bant Company creature is probably Reflector Mage.
Well, let's talk about those two then.
Okay.
So Archangel Avacyn has dominated Standard since her
coming out party at Pro Tour.
Since she decided that tokens were her best friends. What about her fits into this deck? A lot of people, including myself, have talked about not playing her because sometimes she just feels awkward and not. She's so different than what the rest of the deck is doing.
Yeah, that's very true. But the reason that I am so high on the card in the deck is because having played green-white tokens for a long time and feeling like my Bant Company matchup was very, very good, this card was a big reason for that. Basically, Bant Company can almost never beat an Avacyn, so if you can play it in the mirror, why wouldn't you?
Okay. The other card that you talked about was Reflector Mage, the one of my least favorite cards ever printed.
Yeah, it's not a super fun card, but it's kind of just, if you're going to play Bant Company, not playing 4 of them is just wrong. So you definitely need to play it. It's an insane tempo play. If you're on the play and you bounce your opponent's 2-drop, they're so far behind. So far behind that they may as well just scoop them up. But not quite. It's great even like off of your collected companies in the late game to bounce your opponent's more expensive threats. It's just good. Assuming your opponent is playing creatures, it's great.
What is the thought of, we're going to talk about the best spell in the deck, which is Collected Company. It's the namesake of the deck.
Right.
What is the interaction like with Spell Queller and Reflector Mage going on at the same time?
So you kind of have to make educated decisions as to when to fire off your companies for that reason. So if your opponent casts a Kalitas, you need to say, okay, am I going to try to Spell Queller this, or am I going to try to Reflector Mage it?
Right.
And you have to choose right then and there if you're going to do it with the Kalitas on the stack or not. And, sometimes it's easy, like, I've already drawn 2 Reflector Mages, I'm much more likely to find a Spell Queller, or vice versa. But sometimes it's just kind of a gut call. I ended up playing Bounding Krasis, which usually let me err on the side of after. If it was truly a coin flip, I would go with after instead of before, because I had 6 versus 4.
Well, we actually are going to get into Bounding Krasis in just a second, but I would like to talk about Collected Company as a whole and the power level of that card. How good is this card?
Well, it's the reason that I've played a lot of subpar creatures over the last couple of years, and a lot of people I think feel similarly. Like, you're really locked into what cards you're playing, or what converted mana cost you're playing, and you're really glutting yourself with a 3-drop just to get maximum value out of this card. So it's changed the way people build creature decks in Standard. This mana curve is straight nonsense in any other format.
Yeah, that's true. We actually are going to additionally talk about the mana curve in the deck, and but let's go on to the most interesting card choice in your deck. Something that I think brings you very favored against a lot of the ramp style decks, and that's Bounding Krasis.
Yeah, I agree. As long as you can keep your guys in play and not get them swept up in the Kozilek's return, Bounding Krasis is your single best card for beating Emrakul other than Summary Dismissal. Just because they can't run your guys into it. If you can get their guys tapped down, there's pretty minimal damage they can really do on your turn. So it just really helps that out a lot. And even just sometimes if your opponent plays a big creature to stabilize the board, being able
like
to,
a World Breaker even.
Yeah, exactly. Just get out of my way. A lot of times you can still have them dead on the attack back.
Yeah, or at least put them in a position where like they're in big trouble.
Right, or just tapping down their Kalita so they can't gain relevant life, or their Dragonlord Tarka so they can't million you.
So the next thing that we should talk about is the land base here. What is the reason that we went with no Evolving Wilds?
Because that card is crazy bad. But really, it just helps smooth out the draws a lot when you're not playing it. It also, not playing Evolving Wilds means that you don't take lands out of your deck, which lets you play one less land, I think. At least that's the kind of my logic behind it.
How did it work out for you?
I had very few mana problems with this deck. The only time that I ever really remember having a bad mana game with this deck was a flood issue, and that just happens to anybody.
Sure. And
you can, of course, no mana base is ever perfect in Magic, especially in Standard. But I think that this, as long as you play disciplined with your land drops, that I think this mana base is just better than the one that most people play.
Okay. The next thing that I would love to talk to you about is your choice of only 3 Duskwatch Recruiters.
Yeah, so it's a 2-drop that's not really all that good on turn 2. It's a 5-drop. It's just a 5-drop that you can hit with your Collected Company. So playing them on turn 2, I was in a point where I had to cut a 2-drop, and it's the one that's the least powerful on turn 2.
Okay. So I find this interesting. I actually find that that in my games with Bant Company, that Duskwatch Recruiter and then letting it flip is like one of the most powerful plays in the deck, because you get to cheapen the cost of things like Spell Queller and like Selfless Spirit.
And that is true, especially Spell Queller, because it would let you play a tap land on your turn 3.
Yeah.
And hold up Spell Queller, which is really, really powerful. Just again, part of the benefit is that I'm not playing tap lands on turn 3 all that often with this mana base.
Sure.
So I didn't feel like I needed that crutch as much. And so, although you also have to rely on your opponents letting you flip it. Right? It takes 2 to tango on that.
Sure.
So it just wasn't happening for me enough. I think that it's an extremely powerful card.
Okay.
But it is something that people have done in the past, and I think that it just fits a little bit better in this particular build of the deck.
When we were going to talk about the mana curve, and this is kind of where we're at. What is up with the mana curve of these decks? Why do they play so many 3s?
Well, because those are the biggest creatures you can get off of your Collected Company, so it gives you the most value. 4 mana instant speed, put 6 mana worth of creatures into play is just quite the bargain. Yeah,
I mean, even just Tireless Tracker or Sylvan Advocate is...
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of beef if you get it,
I mean, for those who don't know, I mean, this deck plays Sylvan Advocate, one of the best cards in Standard. Green 1, it's a 2/3, got Vigilance. And this is the deck that I think that it really benefits to the point where you get to 6 lands, because of, being able to have a Lumbering Falls in play with a Sylvan Advocate. This deck abuses that, I think, because it puts on so much pressure in the form of tapping guys down with Bounding Krasis or countering spells with Spell Queller and, bouncing things with Reflector Mage that this puts on the beats.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And it makes your Dromoka's commands really powerful because it can tangle with anything once you have 6 mana. So, it's really, really...
What is your favorite interaction in the deck?
Probably using your Selfless Spirits to flip your Avacyn, because your opponent doesn't need to participate in flipping your Avacyn, which most people are pretty wily and will play around that to the best of their abilities, even including taking sometimes significant amounts of damage to avoid flipping your Avacyn.
And so Selfless Spirit has a sacrifice ability that you can make your creatures indestructible, which is, first of all, very good in the mirror match.
Right.
And secondly, quite powerful with what Casey's talking about, that Avacyn flip, which it flips into a 6/5 that deals damage on the backside. It deals 3 damage to all creatures and all opponents, correct?
Yeah. So, or all other creatures. So she doesn't take any damage herself, but yeah. And exactly. So it turns on your Wrath of God for free, basically. It's pretty similar to the interaction between Avacyn and Hangerback Walker.
Where you would cast a 0 mana Hangerback Walker.
Exactly. Only Hangerback Walker is not a great card in the standard format. It was
Reflector Mage and Spell Queller have
really
a lot to do with that, which is great. I mean, it's funny that we look back on standard formats and you think of like they made cards specifically to beat Jace that later became problems. And Hangerback Walker was a problem card, and so, well, it's pretty easy to answer. We'll just spell Queller and Reflector Mage it, but that's also unfun.
Yeah, exactly. But Hangerback Walker was just not. Obviously, you can't play Hangerback Walker in your collected company deck either.
Oh heavens, no!
So, I think that interaction is a lot more powerful, especially if you have 2 Selfless Spirits and you can keep your board intact while wiping your opponents.
Yeah, I mean that would be crazy powerful.
Yeah, I've done that a number of times in the mirror, and it's usually the end of the game. But also, sometimes your opponents, it kind of gives you pseudo-reach. Like, it's almost like sacrifice Selfless Spirit, deal 3 damage to your opponent.
Yeah.
Which sometimes is enough to win the game.
What are your bad matchups with the deck?
Well, the Emerge decks, especially the Haunted Dead Emerge decks, just because those guys, there's no getting rid of them. They're just there to block you and ruin your life forever. Yeah,
I would say that they're not glaringly bad, right? I mean, like, if they get the Haunted Dead combo going, that is bad for you.
Oh, yeah. If they, like, grapple into Haunted Dead Prized Amalgam, discard another Prized Amalgam to get their Haunted Dead, the game's over.
That's bad for you. But a lot of their games don't play out that way. And that's one of the things that I think Bant Company has going for it is its consistency.
Yeah, exactly. You can, if you can get them the first time, like, when they try to cast their grapple, if you Spell Queller it and you strand certain cards in their hand...
Yeah.
And they have to actually take the draw step and find Haunted Dead the old-fashioned way. It's not nearly as powerful. So you get to really, like, start putting it to them.
What's your best matchup with the deck?
Basically any aggressive deck, because your creatures are just a little bit beefier than theirs, but really the Blue-Red Alchemist deck. Just because Dromoka's command counterspells creatures that don't die to Fiery Impulse, like Reflector Mage, Spell Queller. It's a theme deck of cards they can't beat.
And it's so funny because that's one of the most popular decks. Bant is the other most popular deck. It's one of those things that you would wonder how that happens.
Yeah, and I think it's because it's sort of like a triangle metagame. The Thermal Alchemist decks prey on the Emerge decks quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because they just dirtle way too much to be, getting Incendiary Flowed and Collective Defianced.
I think that from our initial testing and from what the Blue-Red players were saying at GP Portland, there was just this, I just had the Dodge Bant Company feeling of those guys.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, because I played against that deck a couple of times, and people had different opinions. Some people thought it wasn't as bad as advertised. Some people felt very unlucky for playing against it.
Yeah.
It really just depends. I think that Dromoka's command is a savage beating. People are moving away from playing the full 4 Dromoka's commands main. Some of them are playing 0 main, which can help that matchup a little bit for Alchemist, but they're just replacing them with counter spells, which can be just as good.
With the Emerge, you specifically talk about the Haunted Dead Emerge decks. You put in here that you think that the reason the matchup's bad for you is just that you can't attack people ever.
Right, because they've got, these Haunted Deads are in play, they've got the Prized Amalgams, so they can block you, usually trading, because your creatures are 3-drops too. And then they get to just come back and back and back. Like, Haunted Dead is a better card advantage engine than Collected Company.
Okay. How much of the Emerge decks, the Blue-Red decks, what's going on in the metagame right now that would make you either want to pick or not pick, playing these great cards like Nissa, Vastwood, Seer?
when would you choose specifically which creatures to play?
No, just playing Collected Company. I just like Nissa Vastwood Seer, so I was calling her out.
Oh, okay, sure. I mean, the Mirror is the most common matchup you're going to play in Magic Online right now with Bant Company, which is, 50-50. So if you can get your deck in a good spot and get your understanding of the matchup in a good spot, you can be a little bit favored there. And like I said, I think it's pretty close to rock, paper, scissors. I think that you're pretty disadvantaged against the Emerge deck. It's not unwinnable if you build your deck right. You go heavier on the counter spells because sometimes one counter spell really is just enough to break them.
Sure.
And if you can, Reflector Mage a Pilgrim's Eye, sometimes that's enough to slow them down significantly. So, if you have the right draws, you can beat anything.
Okay. Let's move on to the sideboard. So in the sideboard we have 2 Den Protector, the Duskwatch Recruiter, Lambholt Pacifist, 2 Thalia, Heretic, Cathar, the other 2 Clash of Wills, the other 2 Dromoka's commands, 2 Ojutai's command, 1 Summary Dismissal, and 2 Tamiyo. What is the reason for the Duskwatch Recruiter over the second Lambholt Pacifist?
Just because in the matchups where they're both good, Duskwatch Recruiter is a little bit better. And it's mostly kind of in similar matchups where you're trying to grind.
Okay.
And so Duskwatch Recruiter is... I wanted to have the 4th one in my 75. The Lambholt Pacifist is really, really powerful in specific matchups.
Like ramp.
Yeah, it's really good against ramp. It's really good against mono white.
Okay.
And Bant humans, just because it can tangle with anything. It's watchable.
Sure. The thing that we obviously should talk about here is the power of Tamiyo. In the podcast we talked about it's one of the best cards in the set in our opinion. It's been allocated to the sideboard in most people's decks, not being played in the main deck, yet still most people play it in the sideboard. What are the matchups that are so important that almost everyone universally is playing this card?
Yeah, so it's very good as a way to recoup your card advantage against control decks, like Languish decks, where Avacyn doesn't really help you that much against Languish.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, it can be very powerful in the mirror if you're on the draw, because you don't want your Dromoka's commands.
Yeah.
So it lets you use your flex slots a little bit differently and go bigger.
Sure.
And the card is just great. If Avacyn weren't a card and Collected Company weren't a card, I think this would be, something you would play in the style of deck as a 4 of.
Yeah, I think that Craig Wesco actually has a band deck he is playing with Gideons and the Tamiyos instead of Collected Companies.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. That's a space that I was definitely looking to play in. I mean, I was playing Bant tokens even before the set came out, just because I really liked what the blue cards offered to your green-white tokens deck. I think this card could be a haymaker in that style of deck, or even just post-rotation. Basically, if you look at this deck list, it loses Jace, Nissa, Collected Company, and the commands, and that's it. So that is something that could easily slot into kind of your curve topper in your...
I actually wanted to talk to you about your choices here. So you'll have 2 Ojutai's command and only 1 Summary Dismissal. A lot of people are just playing as many Summary Dismissals as possible. When you and I talked about it, I think we came to the conclusion that Ojutai's command usually does what Summary Dismissal wants to do anyway, and then has other upside.
Right, exactly. So bringing back your Selfless Spirit to counter their back half of their Kozilek's return is basically the same thing that Summary Dismissal does. I mean,
yeah,
sure,
you counter the card and then bring back the Selfless Spirit, and it does the same thing. Whereas in other times, it can do, you can kill them, right? It can.
Yeah, exactly. Like just on your end step, okay, I'm gonna draw a card and bring back a beater.
Yeah.
And just start
bring back that Sylvan Advocate, adding. If you have a Lowering Falls in play, you're adding
6 power to the board.
Yeah.
Which is significant. That can be just enough to close the game out. Which Summary Dismissal just doesn't have the flexibility. I've even gained life off of this card when my opponent in the mirror in game 1, when I was still playing that in the main, thought I was dead and they had attacked all out. I gained a couple of life, made a block, went to 1, and then killed them on the crackback. It's just a more versatile card. So that's why I would opt for more commands over Summary Dismissals. But Summary Dismissal is still powerful, and it really can help you shut down the Haunted Dead engine. At least fog it.
Are you pretty happy this deck won't be a thing at Pro Tour Kaladesh when you're going to Hawaii?
Yeah, because then I won't be tempted to play it. Collected Company is like I'm in an abusive relationship with it. It always tempts me to play it, and then it always really daggers me when I do. So, just taking away that temptation will be nice, and also, it'd be nice to be able to play creature decks that aren't Collected Company decks. Gives you a little bit more varied deck building.
If somebody were to play in a tournament this weekend, though, I think that we're both on this is a completely reasonable deck choice.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that if you were playing in, like an SCG or a GP that was standard, I think this is a totally reasonable choice to
Online RPTQs coming up, regular PTQs coming up online.
Yeah.
Tons of different ways that you could be to playing this deck and getting value out of it. I mean, there's so much hatred in the world of Magic for certain cards, right? Whether it's, I don't love Dromoka's Command. But I think that there's also some beauty in the fact that cards can dominate a format, like Collected Company, Dromoka's Command, Hangerback Walker last year was quite powerful. Like, there's just all kinds of... As unfun as the cards are, like, I think that in the end of the day, you do look back and be like, man, do you remember Stoneforge Mystic?
Yeah, like...
Man, do you remember...
wild.
Do you remember, Click? Like...
Yeah, exactly. And it plays in a similar space where it's very powerful, but it isn't quite oppressive, right? It doesn't shut other cards completely out of the format. It just makes it so if you want to play other strategies, you might have to game plan around this.
Yeah.
It's a boogeyman without being oppressive.
You can say that, but I think Dromoka's Command is oppressive.
I mean, people are...
They're cutting them now.
Out of the deck.
And that could be a huge boon to the format, but overall, I think that decks like this, these Clash of Wills and main deck, more instant speed. I love Bounding Krasis. If you're interested in trying out the deck list, let us know how it goes. But thank you, everybody, for watching. This is Casey's version of Bant Company. Obviously, there's so many different ways that you could build this deck. So many different people putting in the hive mind and really churning out deck lists for Bant Company. If you don't like this one, there's so many other ways that you could build this deck in.
Seriously, you can play like Jerry Thompson and play Bant Control Company with 4 Jaces and 4 Nissas.
Yeah.
Yep,
there's a ton of different ways to build it. So thank you, everybody, for watching, and we'll see you all next week. Hopefully, I get to my phone and I hear that Michael's in the top 8 of this RPTQ, and
and we can talk about whatever deck he played.
Yeah, he actually played pretty close to Michael Major's deck. So.
Oh, okay. Sweet.
All right, thank you.